Now, when it comes to writing a story in someone else's pre-established universe, like Star Wars obviously is, having been created by George Lucas, it seems like there's two kind of base ways of approaching it or going about it. You can either try your best to honor the original creator and do something that attempts to sort of, or on some level, mimic what you think they, the creator, would have done. Or you can try to bring in your own thoughts or ideas or creative style and, in a sense, make it your own, to use their sandbox to build your own castle, if you will. Basically, when it comes to creating new Star Wars, it feels like there are those who want to do something for Star Wars, and then there are those who want to do something with Star Wars. And, interestingly enough, I think the sequel trilogy may just be the best, or perhaps worst, example of both of these sort of thought processes. You first had J.J. Abrams, who clearly tried his damnedest to replicate George Lucas's Star Wars and ultimately created two films that were little more than nostalgia trips, while Rian Johnson clearly made the movie he wanted to make and said what he wanted to say with it. He's acknowledged he didn't have much interest in making a middle movie in a trilogy, that he wanted to tell a complete story, and that he has little to no interest in things like world building. And mind you here, I don't think these two approaches are or necessarily need to be or should be mutually exclusive. In fact, I think Star Wars is at its best when it's somewhere in between the two. One of the reasons why I loved the expanded universe so much is because it was clearly made or written by people with a deep reverence and understanding of Star Wars, and yet they often tried to do new and unique things or told different types of stories with it, all the while usually making sure to keep that Star Wars feeling George Lucas initially established. Heck, even George Lucas himself has complained that The Force Awakens didn't do anything new, and that's because he always tried and did do something at least a little different with each film he made. No two of George's movies felt exactly the same, and yet they all still end up feeling like the same universe or part of the same story. They all felt like the same Star Wars, which I think is pretty damn impressive. This is also why I feel like Dave Filoni has been rather successful creating Star Wars and is liked or loved by most fans, including myself. Because he both wants to honor George Lucas, he wants to make Star Wars the way Lucas would have done it, but he'll also inject and explore his own ideas and try to tell his own stories, though usually in a way that more so expands the initial ideas or groundwork Lucas laid out. And no, he doesn't always do that, nor does it always work out. Again, I'm a big fan of Filoni, but I have questioned or not liked some of his decisions, and I'm not just talking about saber copters here. Inserting something like the world between worlds that essentially makes time travel possible in Star Wars was not the best choice in my opinion, and that's more of a personal taste, since I don't think time travel should have any place in a franchise like Star Wars. And it seems as if it was done as a way to bring back Ahsoka, who is clearly his favorite character, or to explain how she survived her encounter with Darth Vader. And in general, one of the signs of bad fanfiction is the near-perfect and beloved self-insert character, or a story that does little more than glorify, if not almost to deify, a favorite character of the author. And for me, the way Filoni handles the Ahsoka series, or how he handles the character in it, will in a way be the ultimate decider here. It'll show or tell us how well he is or isn't able to handle his attachments, if you will, and if he truly should have even more creative control at Lucasfilm going forward. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned at all about how Dave will handle Ahsoka in the series. I mean, I'm a big fan of Ahsoka, she's become one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars, but I have a little interest in seeing her run around easily figuring everything out and always saving the day. I want to see her truly challenged on a new level. The same way I wanted some type of new struggle or challenge for Luke Skywalker in the sequel trilogy. So many people seem to think I hate what was done to Luke because I wanted to see him become godlike or something, when instead I just didn't want to see him completely broken, and if you did want to break him, you need to earn it. It shouldn't have happened off-screen. But I digress, and though I think and hope Filoni will get the Ahsoka series right, and that this will be yet another step into a larger world for him, that it won't be long till he has even a larger or bigger role in the company and gets to make more creative decisions, one upcoming show I truly am worried about is The Acolyte from showrunner Leslie Headland. And it's a show that'll take place some 100 years before the prequel trilogy and will be about the rising of dark side power, which might make one immediately assume this could be a show about Darth Plagueis or even Darth Tenebrous, who came before him and was his master. That maybe it'll be a series that uses the Plagueis novel from the EU, which might just be my favorite book from the EU, as a sort of template or that it'll build up into it. And though, sure, it potentially could, we don't know a ton just yet about the Acolyte, but from the comments made by Leslie Headland herself, I fear she falls more into the what can I do with Star Wars camp rather than the what can I do for Star Wars camp, because she recently said that when you're doing something completely original like we are, you want to question the status quo of the era that you live in. What I think is so interesting right now is that everybody thinks they're right. The Jedi really think they're right, and George tells us that they're wrong in Phantom. They missed a huge aspect of the dark side rising that just felt like fertile ground to look into what's going on for all of us right now. Okay, so first of all, you're not doing something completely original, are you? You're doing something set in the Star Wars universe that's been around for 45 years at this point. So anything you create is being created on or off the backs of others. And even if you're being original with your particular story, which is not a problem in and of itself, as I discussed before, we do need some new things in Star Wars from time to time, I don't know why that automatically means you have to question the status quo of the era you or we right now live in. I mean, consider the possibility that people are inundated these days with people giving their takes or opinions on the modern world and don't want that in their entertainment, that they don't want a reflection of the world they live in. They want a reflection of the Star Wars universe that, again, has been around for 45 years and has taken on a life of its own. Basically, they want to escape this world for a little while, not be reminded of it. And I know this is when some will cry out, but George Lucas made Star Wars political in the first place, and it was a commentary on the time he lived in. It was about the Vietnam War. And sure, that's true to an extent, but George Lucas has also said he made Star Wars for 12-year-old boys and wanted to reinvigorate spirituality in the young.
The idea was simply to do a high-adventure film that I loved when I was a kid with meaningful psychological themes. You know, it's hard for people to realize, and I'm not supposed to say this, and I wasn't supposed to say it then, but, you know, it's a film for 12-year-olds. That's...
But it brings out the kid in all of us, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it was designed to be a film like mythology of this is what we stand for. You're about to enter the real world. You're 12 years old. You're going to go on into the big world. You're moving away from your parents being the center focus. You're probably scared. You don't know what's going to happen. And here's a little idea of some of the things you should pay attention to.
And I certainly don't hear the people who cry out it's always been based on politics and the modern world, advocating for it to just be for young boys or males in general, and wanting to see it bring back a sense of spirituality in young people. Oddly enough, they're being very selective when it comes to what Star Wars originally was or was meant to be. Almost as if they just want it to be used instead of honor its original purpose, which was more or less to teach us rather generic, albeit very important, life lessons about how being more selfless can lead to genuine joy and happiness, and that greed ultimately leads to misery. It tried to teach us to believe in ourselves as well as something more than the self. Which is maybe a lesson lost on someone like Leslie Headland, who thinks George Lucas was saying with the prequels that the Jedi way is wrong, when in actuality the prequels are more a cautionary tale about becoming too complacent and placing too much trust in government and rules and regulations. The Jedi of the time failed because they started to follow the Republic and their own code too strictly instead of just listening to the will of the Force and trying to figure out what was best in the situation or for the people. Qui-Gon being right to train Anakin despite it going against the Jedi code, and how Anakin ultimately turns out in the Jedi system that has gone astray. It's meant to show that aforementioned message. We're supposed to wonder what if Anakin was properly trained by Qui-Gon Jinn and became a proper Jedi. Headland in interviews has also talked about how her villain is essentially going to be a former Jedi who had trouble with the Jedi Order and leaves it and is basically misunderstood by them, it sounds, and then falls to the dark side and probably becomes a Sith. And I mean, that doesn't sound like the most original story ever. That's more or less Anakin's story. Only this time it will be a female character who is no doubt going to be queer. Headland has talked many times about how being queer herself impacts the stories she tells and the characters she wants to see. And we also know that Amandla Stenberg, who is playing the lead character in The Acolyte, identifies as both non-binary and pansexual. And here's the thing, I don't care about that at all, and I don't mean that with any sort of malice or ill will. I'm all for people living and loving how they want. Freedom to be who you want to be is a hill I will fight and die upon. But at the same time, that doesn't mean I care about every individual's choices in life, especially when I've got my own life to worry about. As I've said before, apathy is not objection, and as long as you don't hurt others, I really don't care, more or less, what someone chooses to do with their life. In other words, I really don't care, or won't care, if the main character in The Acolyte is queer or whatever it might end up being, because that doesn't automatically make for a good or bad character, or for an interesting or boring story in my book. And I feel like sometimes writers insert a character with a certain, say, sexuality because they feel that's interesting in and of itself. And maybe it is to them and some people, which is fine. I'm certainly not against people feeling like they're represented in movies or shows or whatever else it might be. But it isn't going to be important to everybody. And if some end up not liking that character, it doesn't automatically mean they reject what the character represents to the people who do care or identify with them. But anyway, I'm getting off topic, and my point is, I do worry about The Acolyte, that it's sounding more like someone who wants to do something with Star Wars rather than for Star Wars, who has their own sort of agenda for the franchise. Though, that said, I hope I'm wrong, and as always, I'll give it a fair chance, and if when it comes out I feel like it's a great show, I'll say as much. But if it's not, I won't hold back from saying that, and that doesn't mean I have anything against the people who created it. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of The Acolyte based on what we know or what we've heard so far. Are you excited and hopeful for this one, or not excited at all, or maybe you have some doubts? Whatever the case may be, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.